For those of you that kind of strolled in during our kind of engagement in musical worship and some liturgical bits and such, we just want to orient ourselves today. We, at the first Sunday of every month, we call Benevolence Sunday. I've got a full disclosure. I think that term just kind of sucks a little bit. It's just like, but we just can't seem to find a better word. Although in preparing just for the little reflection today, and I'm going to do a little bit of an interview with Didier. I know he's out with the children right now, but he's out in the back. You're hiding. You're prepping. You're like in the green room, just getting ready for your big moment. But we're going to just chat with Didier at the end, just a little bit. So I don't want to go too long here, but maybe the true understanding of hospitality is maybe what we could call this aspect of who we are, the ministry of hospitality, and Hospitality Sunday, as much as benevolence. Benevolence, it's kind of this whole thing that we're wrestling with as a community the last years, finding this posture of sharing versus giving as what glues us together, as what unites us in community. Benevolence and hospitality maybe are, they're bedfellows. They do interact well together, just as giving and sharing do. But the lean is into community, is into relationship. And hospitality brings us there. I think if we courageously lean into the teachings of Jesus and what he invites us to become as we surrender our lives to him. So he says this very interesting thing. You might have heard this before. It's nestled in a teaching of Jesus as he was speaking about the end of times and the shifting into a new heaven and a new earth. And he's kind of describing how he'll look across scores and scores and thousands of people and know how he recognizes us. So it's not so much a checklist of who's in and who's out. It's not so much a checklist of who's done good and who's done bad. It's not giving us a grade, like who got an A or an A plus or a B plus or a B, they'll get into heaven. Everybody that got a C or a C minus or a D or an F, they're going to hell. It's a completely different posture, although it is quite terrifying. But he looks out across this vast sea of people and he begins to recognize certain people. I know who you are. I recognize you. I see me in you. There's something of resonance that you have caught and captured what it means to surrender your life to me. And we've journeyed this walk for a while. As we continue to journey into eternity, he says, as we're making this big pivot at this time in history, Judgment Day, come along with me. Come along. We're going to keep walking this out. We're going to keep living this out step by step. There's many things that he says, but one of them he says, I was a stranger and you invited me in. I was a stranger and you invited me in. The Old Testament contains many stories that reveal the wonder and the joy of welcoming strangers. When one turns to the New Testament, one discovers a similar focus on receiving strangers gladly. Many stories teach the importance of the virtue of welcoming those we know and those we do not know, and also those from whom we have become estranged, maybe even to the point of even becoming enemies. There's something at the core of who Jesus is and what we become as we become more like him that has the capacity to welcome a stranger in. Stranger. Most of you probably are aware of this, but it comes from in the Greek setting, it's xeno. It's foreign, out of place. Someone who's unusual, someone you're not used to. Can mean a refugee, someone who's extraordinary and just doesn't quite fit. There's a lot of brain study being going on. There's a new field of study they're calling now neural diversity. And we're beginning to understand amongst children and now adults, sometimes we've done some very painful, destructive things because we haven't understand the wiring of some people's brains and we've shoved them to the side. I'm of course, a huge concern is how we have treated historically those who carry mental illness. But this is way beyond that. It's almost commonplace now. You're sitting with some, oh, that guy's on the spectrum. She's on the spectrum. We almost say that too much, don't we? But it's because we haven't known what to do with the extraordinary that are outside of our norm. Matthew here, Tamara, come in on their wheels. And it's like we're only catching up now as a society how to welcome in the stranger, the extraordinary. The ramps, still to this day, I'm sure you end up at buildings where you can't get in. Is that right, Matthew? Yeah. You can't even get in. Yeah. Jesus says, you were a stranger. You were strange to me. You were different than me, and yet you invited me in. It also means opposite of citizen. Estrange. Many times in the writing of the biblical narrative, it's used when you're trying to contrast family. Someone who's not quite kin. A stranger. Of course, this is where we get xenophobia from, right? And rather that being a political football and it become about right, left, or liberal, or conservative, or whatever, sometimes we're just plain scared, aren't we? Like, let's be brutally honest with each other. But Jesus invites us to something better. Henry Nouwen says this: in our world full of strangers, estranged from their own past, their culture and country, from their neighbors, friends, and family, from their deepest self and their God, we witness a painful search for a hospitable place where life can be lived without fear and where community can be found. Although many, we might say even most, strangers in this world become easily the victim of fearful hostility, it is possible. In the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, if those of us who follow Jesus would courageously just step out of our walled units and the demanding of our own rights, if we could just step to the place of liberation and freedom in Jesus, it's possible. Nouwen says even obligatory for Christians to offer an open and hospitable place where strangers can cast off their strangeness and become our fellow human beings. The movement from hostility to hospitality is hard, full of difficulties. That's why we love to run meetings, especially the bigger they get, the better, because we don't have to move into hospitality. Our society seems to be increasingly full of fearful, defensive, aggressive people, anxiously clinging to their property, and inclined to look at their surrounding world with suspicion, always expecting an enemy to suddenly appear, intrude, do harm, take your stuff. But still, we need to think about these things. There's wise and prudent boundaries. There is healthy ways to live in society and culture. But still, the vocation that Jesus invites us to is to convert the hostis, which is the Latin for hostility, for enemy, to a hospes, which is the Latin for friend. Hospitality. Safety. The enemy into a guest, and to create the free and fearless space where brotherhood and sisterhood can be formed and fully experienced. Without being too simplistic or reductionist, what is the hope of Congo? To move from hostility to hospitality. It's the work and presence of Jesus, isn't it? That's why you hear in Teresa this deep intercessory playing, Jesu Christo, Jesu Christo, Jesu Christo, come Lord Jesus. It's very interesting how xeno actually is the root of an other word, which means to entertain or to receive as a guest. In the biblical narrative, this extravagant, radical posture of the hostis becoming the hostess is at the core of understanding of hospitality. I was a stranger and you invited me in. Invited me in is a clumsy way of English capturing this Greek word, which is extracted out of a Hebraic understanding. It's actually, invite me in is the root word for the word that we use in English and in Greek to describe where the people of Jerusalem and the followers of God, Jehovah, the Israelites, the Jewish people, they're synagogues. It's the word for synagogue. To bring together, to reconcile, to receive as a guest, to gather together, to glean. Another way this word is translated in other contexts is to store and keep safe. Wouldn't it be amazing if we could treat each other like that? To gather up, to collect. The Old English here, quoting from a very old book on Greek, which was published in 1887, speaks of this text. Ye took me in. Love this. I was harborless, and you lodged me. The preposition implies along with. So it's not you invited me in and then put me in your suite. You actually brought me into the household circle. I don't have great answers for this. I don't know if I've ever really done this in my life. And I know, again, this isn't a checklist. This isn't a rule. This isn't whatever. It's the invitation of a heart posture, which we can only pull off in community. This is why no one person is the ministry of hospitality. It's the community of faith. Leviticus 19, when a stranger sojourns with you in your land, you shall do them no wrong. The stranger who sojourns with you shall be to you as the native among you, and you shall love him as yourself, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. So even as we grow in being hospitable to particularly those who make us uncomfortable, I think we're taking steps. We're learning together as the Church of Jesus Christ and as society. It still invites us into a journey that moves us out of a comfort zone of just provision and care. It compels us to look again at sharing, at what family really means. And one of the reasons I want to talk to DJ just briefly today, and we'll do more of this over the time, is I don't know, somehow our comprehension of family has been shattered somewhat, I think, in our Anglo-Saxon and Euro journey. I'm not saying it's all bad. I don't think it's all gone. But when we say family, and particularly people that are coming into our city and are now becoming part of our community, when they say family, it kind of means two different things. Let me just give you a quick little example. I don't know if this will be helpful or not, but across our vineyards internationally, we now have 16 Association of Vineyard Churches across the world. One thing that I think we've done well is we really leaned into not having some central office, certainly not a central office in Europe or North America that was kind of dictating to all the vineyards of the world how they should operate. So we very, very courageously in some ways, and it's taken us a long, long time. The growth curve is way slower, but now it's somewhat exponential. Where when we sit, Anita and I were just in England a few months ago with leaders from across different Association of Vineyard Churches. And as we sat with Nepali, we sat with Zambians, we sat with Kenyans, we sat with people from across Europe, we sat with different tribal people, and we're all trying to sit at the table with equal voice and equal space. So the national director of Vineyard Nepal is speaking at the same space, the same voice, the same volume as the national director of the United States of America. It's a beautiful thing. But we hit a juncture where they were being released as their own Association of Vineyard Churches, because that's what we should do, right? Self-sustaining, kind of up on their 2 feet, this sort of thing. And about 4 or 5 years ago, several of our African friends and a couple Asian leaders sat us down and went, okay, we talk a lot about family in the vineyard. You need to listen to us for a moment. We said, well, what do you want to tell us? They said, well, we watch you. And what we think you think family is, and when someone grows up in the family, you kind of wait for them, you discipline them, and you kind of keep them together, and then they take their driver's license training, and then they hit 16 and they get their driver's license. You kind of let them use the car. They can drive around, and then you work very, very hard to get them out of the house so that they can go to college and go to university. And once they've done that, then they're up on their own 2 feet, and you celebrate. You maybe even give them a little bit to help them get money for a mortgage, and they move out and they go into their own house and everything, and you all say, well, we'll see you at Christmas time. They say, you think, they were saying to us, that's mature family, that's growing up. And they looked us right in the eyes. Never forget, Damas from Zambia looks at me and he says, we call that abandonment. Now don't tell us what to do. Don't boss us around. Don't be like sort of, the white dudes that are kind of, dominating us. But my goodness, don't walk away. Let's do this together. How do we share? How do we walk together? It's just a completely upside down way for some of us in our cultures. But I think it might be closer to the heart of what Jesus is actually inviting us to be and become. This is a long journey. This doesn't just get switched or changed in a moment. An embracing, a getting to know the stranger, the other, to the point where obligation and duty blur into the background, friendship can emerge. Greater love has no one than this, than to lay down your life for a friend, Jesus says. Jesus so breathtakingly stretches our understanding of friendship. For it was while we were still sinners, Christ dies for us. While we were God's enemies, it says in Romans, we were reconciled to him. And yet, in the midst of it all, he calls us friend. As we ever become transformed into who he is, we see walls break down, saturated in the floodplain of grace. The most extreme other is now embraced as neighbor. We truly can love our enemies and even lay our lives down for another. We can invite the stranger in. Hospitality. Romans 12:13 says, practice hospitality. One of the translations says, be inventive in hospitality. The word here in the Greek literally means to receive a stranger as a guest. Not just your buddies. Not just the amazing gift of hospitality that makes such a cool space for our immediate families or for our friends that we haven't seen for a long time. The word means love of strangers, kindness to strangers. Then Jesus turned to the host. The next time you put on a dinner, don't just invite your friends and family and rich neighbors, the kind of people who will return the favor. Invite some people who never get invited out. The misfits from the wrong side of the tracks. You'll be and experience a blessing. They won't be able to return the favor, but the favor will be returned. Oh, how it will be returned at the resurrection of God's people. We use this verse for our feast that we'll try to bring back online. Slowly but surely, maybe we put the word out to Freedom's Door, we put the word out to Celebrate Recovery, we put the word out on the city. Hopefully we have growing relationships and friendships in the city and ourselves. Thinking about this end of time scenario in Matthew 25, I love what Anna Case Winters says, an American theologian. The real question is not, when will the Son of Man come in all his glory? The real question is, how shall we live while we wait? To be among the righteous is to live out the love of the neighbor, demonstrating justice through acts of mercy for the most vulnerable. To live this way is to be always ready for the judgment and not in the position of saying, oh, I really wasn't expecting you, Jesus. Not here and not now, and certainly not in the distressing disguise of this person in need. Oftentimes the Lord does come to us in disguise as a stranger. Not for the purpose of deceiving or hiding anything, but rather that he may expose and reveal something of himself, something about us, something about this world that we might just miss seeing otherwise. These are not intrusions. These are not distractions. These aren't ministry checklists. These are gifts from the Holy Spirit. Humanity that we can learn to see with love and compassion. Mother Teresa said this in her little book, In the Heart of the World, Thoughts, Stories, and Prayers. This is what it means to be contemplative in the heart of the world. Seeing and adoring the presence of Jesus, especially in the lowly appearance of bread and in the distressing disguise of the poor. So, first off, you invited me in, Jesus says. Let's just ponder how much of who Jesus is, not just what he does or what he did for us, who he is that we miss when we don't practice this kind of hospitality. There is a spiritual gift of hospitality, but it is clear in the New Testament writings, sprinkled through the epistles, that hospitality is to be something we cultivate in our lives. And it is one of the ways we recognize leadership in the community of faith. It says an elder must practice hospitality. A deacon must practice hospitality. Dear friend of mine who's had a big public crash and burn, just exposed in sexual sin and all sorts of stuff, has an international ministry. I remember sitting with him some years ago in Toronto, and he was so proud. He was like, I'm a teacher, and I could just, now I'm starting to get invitations just to teach. And the church is finally at a place of strength where I'm just the teaching pastor. He says, because I can't stand people. Now, I get what he's saying, but I remember I came home to Anita, and I was just, something was off in my gut. Doesn't mean we have to be extroverts. Doesn't mean we have to have people over every single day. It's the posture of the heart. How are we missing Jesus when we miss radical hospitality? Again, it's not about going out today and inviting over strangers. You'll just miss the point again. It's about, Lord, over the arc of my life until you come again, help me see where I need to grow in this area, our community, where we need to grow. Secondly, Hebrews 13:2, don't forget to show hospitality to strangers, for by doing so, some people have shown hospitality to angels without knowing it. Now, some believe there's a reference to the Old Testament story where Abraham invited in the strangers, and there were angels. And there is that sense of some kind of a supernatural quality here. But also the word for angel simply means an envoy, one who is sent, a messenger, watchers. Might be something very supernatural and something beautiful in that sort of realm of spirituality that's happening. But sometimes people are just sent to us as messengers to help us see things we can't see without them. Some of you know, we did a memorial just a few weeks ago for little Lindsay Molinar, and they send their greetings to you and are so grateful for the support of the community and such. And Tina Marie did a beautiful job on the flowers. I was able to facilitate the memorial. But little Lindsay, 32 years old, I can't remember exactly what condition she had. Yeah, that's right. She was missing a certain chromosome, wheelchaired her whole life. She never spoke one word to her parents in 32 years. In fact, all she could mainly do was screech and scream. You can imagine the journey for 32 years of carrying together and carrying that in team, and the medical professionals that were there at her memorial. But as Sid and Cheryl stood up, and as so many of us were just impacted again, there's so much we saw in Lindsay about Jesus that we forgot or maybe never knew. Though she never said one word, had apparently zero vocabulary, at least that she could articulate, her life spoke so much of endurance, of patience, of suffering, of leaning in. She loved worship. She loved worship. So it's an opportunity to listen and learn so that we may be liberated from our own religious ghetto, our echo chambers of friends and those that are like us, That's not a bad thing. We were at a barbecue a few weeks ago with a bunch of people we've known for years. It's not throwing one thing away for another, but how do we stretch and grow? Break the back of even prejudice. Harriet Tubman, who you might be familiar with, was from America back in the day and was an advocate for just breaking the back of slavery culture. She was one of the significant leaders of architects of what was known as the Underground Railroad. You've heard of that? And a lot of African Americans actually made it up into Canadian soil. But here's what she said when she got to Canada. I crossed the line. I was free. But there was no one to welcome me to the land of freedom. I was a